Welcome to episode 23 of the CVD Podcast. My name is Adam Beaumier, and in this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Emmy Rousseau. Emmy is an absolutely phenomenal person. She's so positive and optimistic and full of energy and knowledge. She's super determined, and she's a successful entrepreneur. And you wouldn't know just by looking at her that she has dealt with high-functioning depression for almost her entire life. In this episode, she takes us way back to kind of where it started when at 14, it seemed like she had it all, but on the inside, she was drowning. See, she had a lot of friends. She was getting really good grades. She was even involved in extracurricular activities, but on the inside, she felt like nobody understands me. Like, this is so hard. Why is everything so difficult? And so she tried to reach out to people that were close to her, but her feelings were dismissed. She was told that, no, you're not depressed. You're just fill in the blank. And she was told this over and over and over again. And eventually she was just like, well, I guess I'm going to suppress that part of me. I guess maybe I'm not feeling what I think I'm feeling. So she tried to push that part of her to the side. And it wasn't until she was 34 that she was actually diagnosed with a depressive disorder. So between the ages of 14 and 34, she didn't know what was wrong with her, quote unquote. I'm using air quotes because that's the language that she used to describe that phase of her life, even though looking back at it now, there wasn't, and there still isn't anything wrong with her. But that was the vocabulary she had back then to describe it. And so for those 20 years, she struggled a lot, and she really felt like she had to live inauthentically, meaning she had to hide part of herself. And that led to a lot of struggles. She was taught that you can't express your sadness or your depression because those aren't valid feelings. That's not actually what you're feeling. So a lot of that actually came out in anger, and she started taking it out on the people that she spent the most time with, which are the people that she loved the most. And that led to some issues as well that Emmy talks about in the episode. It wasn't until she was in her 40s that she really started opening up about her depressive disorder, because she was like, you know what? There's a chemical imbalance in my brain. Like, I can't control that, but I can control what I do about it. And I can't be the only one that is dealing with this. So I'm going to step up. I'm going to talk about it and try to help other people, try to inspire other people that even if you are dealing with depression, you can still live a normal life. You can still live a fulfilling and meaningful and purposeful life and be successful. So in this episode, she talks about all of that. And she also talks about the amazing tools that she's collected over the years and put in her toolbox that she uses to make sure that she can actually get out of bed in the morning, because 95% of the time she feels like crap and wants to stay in bed. She also uses these tools to ensure that she has a meaningful and impactful day as many days of the week as she can. So she is extremely knowledgeable and very, very insightful. I learned so much from having this conversation with Emmy, and I know that you will too. Be sure to check out the description, because there are a lot of links to where you can find Emmy and her company online. There's links to the resources that she mentioned as well. And finally, if you do enjoy this episode, which I think you will, please consider showing us some love by leaving us a review. It would really mean a lot to support the show. And I would really, really appreciate it. All right. Enjoy. All right. Welcome back to the Comfort via Discomfort podcast, where we are creating a mentally healthier world, one conversation at a time. Yes, absolutely. Emmy's on board, and that's why she's here. Super happy to get into your story, Emmy. So I'm going to do things a little bit different here. Going to do a little bio of Emmy before I ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. So Emmy Rousseau is a transformational mentor, speaker, and educator who is passionate about destigmatizing mental health. Big reason why she's here. She cares deeply about this because she has high-functioning depression and has learned that it does not define her or make her any less of a person. She is passionate about sharing what she's learned about the world and helping others like herself. She is the founder and CEO of Trinity Transformations, which we will get into later. And her pillars in life and business are self-love, gratitude, and joy. So, Emmy, welcome to the Comfort via Discomfort podcast.
Thank you so much. It's super exciting to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. As we were talking about before I pressed that record button, I think that this is going to be a really interesting episode, diving into your story of having high functioning depression, what that looks like, how you've even discovered that you have this, what your struggle with it has been, and how you can still become a successful entrepreneur and live somewhat of a normal life. So I'm so excited to get into your story. Before we dive into some of the details around that, why don't you tell us who Emmy is as a person and what you do for work, and then we'll get into things.
Awesome. Thanks. So essentially, I'm a warrior of love. That's who I am as a person. I am all about spreading love, unconditional love, and helping people to understand that self-love and putting yourself first isn't selfish, but actually the way that we best serve the world. And in my business, I do that in a couple of different ways. One is by speaking. I've been speaking to corporate groups, and now I am switching to my passion, which is helping educators, because I was a teacher for 22 years, to know exactly that by putting themselves first and filling their own cup, they'll actually serve the students best. And then the other piece, which is part of the educators package and also just available to the general public, is that I teach intense body spiritual fitness, which we'll get into more, I'm sure, later, because it's one of the most transformative tools I have ever been exposed to and seen in practice. So
intense body
those are the two things
spiritual fitness. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfectly.
I know a little bit about it through you and through Bonnie, through our Think University group, but I'm very interested to learn more about it for sure. And the way that you describe yourself, a warrior of love, I absolutely love that. I think that's the best description that I've heard so far when somebody's described who they are. I absolutely love that. And sending unconditional love to the world, I think that's super, super important. And you've been a teacher for 22 years. That's really interesting. I think that teachers are so underappreciated. So thank you for your time and effort and dedication to educating the youth. What, were you a grade school teacher, high school teacher?
Yes, elementary school. So I taught from K to 6 in various capacities.
Wow, fantastic. And so you talked a little bit about the education side of things. Now, for the Trinity Transformations, what specifically do you do through Trinity Transformations?
Well, that's actually what I do. I teach the fitness classes. That's one of the branches. And then going and delivering the workshops to educators is the second piece. I do still sometimes do corporate workshops, but less and less of that as I expand to the educator side of serving from the outside instead of from the inside.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to describe it. And you said that you moved from doing your sort of speaking and moving more into your passion. Like, what has made that shift happen? Like, what happened in your life where you're like, I need to shift. I need to like follow this thing that I'm really passionate about, rather than something that you're like passively interested in.
Well, I knew it was really the marriage of two things because, well, three things, I guess, because I've known I wanted to be a teacher since I was, grade 8 for sure, maybe earlier, I'm not sure. So I was 13 years old and I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. No surprise, because my mom and my aunt were teachers and it tends to run in families. And so I was for 22 years, but even leaving it and becoming a professional speaker, I was not just a motivational speaker. I shouldn't say just. I wasn't a motivational speaker who's up there just rah-rah and that kind of thing, which people really need. And I follow a lot of motivational speakers, but I was still educating through my speaking because in essence, I'm a teacher to my bones. I will always be a teacher. And then the year and a half ago, I got introduced to intense body spiritual fitness, which is actually where the name Warrior of Love came from, because the founder, Patricia Moreno, who passed away last January, she was the original warrior of love. And when she passed away, she had this mission to reach, I don't know, some people say it's 7.6 million and others say 7.6 billion people. But at any rate, it's a large number, which she was not able to reach in her lifetime. And so we have taken on like, okay, now we're warriors of love and we're going to go out there and spread this love through this incredible practice. So I was focusing on the fitness classes, which is amazing. I love it. And then speaking to corporate, which I loved the message, but I've never been part of the corporate world. So it was helping a lot of people, but it didn't feel to me like I was making the impact I wanted because I left teaching to help teachers from the outside so that they could help the students better. I mean, I literally left teaching because the teachers were drowning. All the educators, it's not just the teachers. Everyone who's working in education was drowning. And I mean, I shouldn't say everyone, but the majority of them, seriously, drowning. And the students drowning. And I could not make the changes from within. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to leave. And then I got some business advice like, oh, there's a lot of bureaucracy in, school boards and this and that and a lot of red tape. Maybe you should just focus on the fitness for now. Come back to that later. And so I did for a while, but I just found like, no, now is the time. Educators really still need me critically, need this program critically at the moment. And so as an activist, as a do-gooder, I cannot wait any longer.
That's really, really interesting. And I love that you mentioned, you're like, I recognize that I can't make the changes from inside. Like I need to get out. I need to see the bigger picture sort of thing. I need to be out of the bubble a bit to be able to like really be able to make the difference that I want to make. And the fact that you went to the corporate side first doesn't completely surprise me. Like, yes, there's a lot of bureaucracy in both, but I think that a lot of times in school boards, things happen very slowly where you're like, okay, but if I'm just starting this business, if I'm just starting this thing on my own, like I need to make this sustainable. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that you had to go somewhere else to sort of generate the revenue and probably honestly to really practice that craft to make sure that you're like, boom, okay, now I know more focused exactly what I want to bring to the educators. So super excited that you are now on this journey to help the educators because like you said, a lot of them are drowning and there's not enough resources towards them. I mean, just in my short time, like in going through high school and university and even afterwards, like having conversations with some of my high school teachers, like they say the same thing and it's not. And I see some of my friends now becoming high school teachers or educators in university and facing the same sort of things. And one of my friends runs a company that is empowering teachers in Africa to be the best that they can possibly be. Yeah, I can see your face light up. I'm 100% going to connect you to him afterwards. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, you need to meet Hakeem. Like he is a ball of energy. And he is on this mission to, basically try to reduce poverty through education. Right. And not by helping the students, but by helping the teachers directly, which will indirectly help the students and have that sort of ripple effect. So it's amazing that you do what you do. And I'm really excited that you're on this mission because I think that it is great. And the way that you describe yourself, warrior of love, I absolutely love that. So I want to start to move into a little bit about maybe not that I want to move into like the high functioning depression for sure, but I want to understand maybe first, like what does a typical day or typical week look like for you with high functioning depression? And then we'll start to sort of get into sort of the story of how you struggled with it, how you were diagnosed with it and how it's affected your personal and professional life, and see where that takes us.
Sure. Sounds good. Well, to start from now, the good news, the other side of the journey, not that the journey is ever over for sure. It's an ever evolving journey, but I'm certainly on the brighter side of the journey now, as far as the depression goes. So now I wake up and complete honesty, I wake up very early, 4:40 in the morning, because I need to have a solid morning routine to set me up for success. Anybody that has a morning routine will tell you that it sets them up for success, and how you start the morning is basically how your day follows. But for me specifically, having depression, every morning I wake up, and I've been doing this for years, I feel like crap. I would rather sleep. Even when I do sleep, it doesn't make me feel any better. Like I never, well, not never, but rarely am like bounding with excitement to get out of bed. You know, some people are just like, okay, it's a new day. No, this is not my reality, because there's a chemical imbalance in my brain. So when I wake up, I'm tired. I'm thinking negative thoughts. Like that's my waking up reality 99% of the time.
Mm-hmm. And
then I remember like, okay, I could, and there are times when I just like give into it, but very rarely, 95% of the time, I'm like, nope, too bad. Get up, do your thing. And some days I make an agreement with myself. If you're still feeling like this after your morning routine, you can go back to bed.
Oh, I like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, like because sometimes it's just fatigue. Like some days it really is fatigue. Right?
Yeah, some days you legitimately need the rest. Like you need to pause. Right. I needed that this morning. That happened this morning. And sometimes it's just needed.
Right. So I've become really in tune with listening to my body, which has helped a lot. But no matter what, I'm like, no, get up, do your thing. And for me, my morning routine starts with meditation, which is so miraculous that I even meditate regularly, because when I was first diagnosed and I'm going to the psychiatrist, he's like, okay, I meditate twice a day. It keeps me calm. It allows me to do X, Y, and Z. You need to meditate. Oh yeah, sure. Being the perfect student that I always used to pretend to be or try to be actually, like, oh yeah, sure. But I had tried meditation for so long and it had never worked for me. And I thought I just couldn't meditate. I thought my monkey mind was too busy. So I really had given up on it. And then funny enough, one day, one friend just said, why don't you try silent meditation? I was like, who's the one who has the mental health condition here? Like, no, I can't even listen and get my mind to calm during a guided meditation. How am I going to do that when I'm just alone with my thoughts? But it is what actually helped me to learn to meditate. Now I can do guided meditations, no problem, and quite enjoy them. But that's what I needed. So what's anybody who's listening?
Oh, I was just gonna. You might have been answering this. I was just gonna ask real quickly. What is the difference between the silent meditation and the guided meditation? Literally, like somebody, like a voice, like guiding you through it versus nothing. Is that
exactly that? Okay. So guided meditation, sometimes music, sometimes not. Depends on who's recording it. Or, I mean, of course, there could be live guided meditations as well. But basically, there's music or there's not. But someone's voice is guiding you through the words, the theme, whatever. And silent is literally no music, no voice, except the voices in your head. Which actually, because everyone thinks that the point of meditation is to silence the voices in your head. But it's not. It's not right. The point. And so once you realize that, like, okay, I mean, they do calm down. If you're in silence and stillness, they do calm down eventually. Even those people who, like me, think they have the most frantic minds. Because I also have ADHD, which does mean that my mind is like going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and there's a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of stimuli. Like I respond to a lot of stimuli more than a neurotypical person would. So there is all that. And still, the stillness and the silence allows my thoughts to calm. And it's almost like, the fog to clear. And then the really important, really true thoughts of who I really am are what are there. And they can speak to me more clearly.
Yeah, really interesting. It's almost like you said, like that fog sort of those like random thoughts that are just happening. That fog sort of moves out of the way after a little bit, and then you're able to actually see like who you are and the thoughts that you're actually having, which is really interesting. But it takes that time, that silence, to be able to remove that fog. When you started,
lots of practice.
And lots of practice, yes. So when you started the silent meditation, how long did it take you to basically recognize that this was going to be helpful?
That's a really good question. I would say probably, I think after about a month, I had hope that it would be helpful.
Interesting.
But I had to start really small because it's like a muscle, right? You don't have the endurance. I don't know very many people who can just start at a 20-minute or 30-minute or hour-long meditation.
Yeah.
So I was starting with 2 minutes. I was like, okay, I could do this for 2 minutes. I can sit in silence for 2 minutes. And then I built it up 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. So it took time to even get to a place where there was that calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so after probably 4 weeks, I was like, okay, I can see that this might work for me at some point. And it probably took about 3 months before I really felt like it is absolutely working. And I need to make this a part of my everyday routine.
Yeah.
By that time, I was probably up to about 20 minutes of silence.
Gotcha. And this was something that you were doing every single day for 3 months.
Wow.
Which this is a really interesting thing. And I know that like we've got a lot to get into, but this is really, really interesting because I mean, I've done some meditation before. I've gone through phases in my life where it's been very helpful. And then I stop and then I try to get back into it. And I'm like, oh, I need to do it for like 10 minutes. Like I need to do it for 10 minutes. And it's really interesting. Like any habit, it's not like you can just bite off the whole thing and just do the whole thing right away. Like you almost sometimes, and it works differently for different people, but a lot of times you need to start that small thing and kind of eventually start increasing the time or increasing the effort or whatever scale you're using for the activity that you're doing. So I love that you say start out with a very simple like 2-minute meditation. Because I feel like sometimes if we say like, oh, I need to do like a 20-minute meditation, like you're almost putting a barrier in front of yourself to even start, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we think of athletes, like what runner would say, okay, for my very first time training and running, I'm going to run a marathon? Nobody. Like that would be asinine, right? We would be like, no, of course not. You're going to start with 100 meters or whatever, Right. I'm not a runner. So, but it's going to be a short distance. You're going to see how you do. You're going to practice and, obviously some runners run longer than 100 meters, but they don't start at a marathon when they first start training. Basketball player starts with like being able to, play a whole game and get a million shots in. Like it just doesn't work like that. You start little, you start with like basic skills and you build upon that foundation.
Yeah.
Same with meditating.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because I don't know, sometimes I feel like there's like this stigma or like this idea that, oh, I'm going to sit down and in my very first meditation, 10-minute meditation, like I'm going to find some answers. I'm going to find some peace. I'm going to find, I'm going to find some clarity or whatever. But it's like, not necessarily. Like, you practice this for 3 months. So like during those 3 months, were there times where you were like, why are you even doing this? Like, stop doing this. Like what made you kind of keep going during those 3 months?
I really needed something that was going to help. And I had other friends that were also telling me like, oh, it's so helpful. And so I had the support and the trust in them. And that helped me to say, okay, I'm going to keep going and do it. And that was just a piece. It still is just a piece of my morning routine. Because another thing that I think is so important in creating new habits is habit stacking. So
yes,
when that was
I love that term.
I had other pieces of the morning routine and I added that on because I was already doing these other things.
Yeah. So what else do you do in your morning routine that is like absolutely essential that you're like, I have to do this to set my day right and to get over this sort of depressive hump that's happening every single morning?
Gratitude journal. That was actually the first piece of my morning routine. I had someone introduce me to the 5-minute journal, probably 5 years ago. And I mean, I'm old enough to have I grew up with the Oprah show, and Oprah was always saying, have a gratitude journal, write in your gratitude journal. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I mean, I detest the idea of writing every day because I have to. Like, no, when I want to write, it just comes spontaneously. And I know there would be days I would forget. And if I went to my mom's to visit or somewhere else, I'd forget to bring the journal. It was just like so much hassle. So I was like, not happening. I'm sorry. I'll just like think of gratitude things here and there, but it never made it part of my practice. So when this person introduced me to the 5-minute journal, which you can get a hard copy, many people do, but it's also an app on my phone, which will send me reminders. which it's so easy and so beautiful. And it always starts your day out and ends your day with these pieces of gratitude. It was like almost, what do they have? Like the such and such for dummies, all those books. It was like that. It was dummy proof, just no fail, and wonderful that it gave me the reminders. And so the gratitude was the biggest piece, and it still is one of the most important pieces that I never cut that out, is the gratitude.
And why is that? Like, what does that do for you? Does it do anything like chemically in your brain? How does that help you, get centered or help you move forward?
Well, gratitude is scientifically shown to be one of the greatest mood boosters. So it does that for me. And, everyone else, again, when you make it a regular practice, and the key is to like feel it, right? Not to just be like, oh, I'm grateful for the sun today. No, who cares, right? Like, it needs to be, you might be grateful for the sun today. And if you feel like you wake up and you're, oh, it's so beautiful. Look how the sun is shining. You feel it. And those of you who are watching will see the difference in my face and my body language, because all of a sudden I'm feeling it. Great. Then that's what I would write down. Mm-hmm. But on the days where that's not what I'm excited about and what I'm feeling grateful for, then that's not what I would write down. So it really does boost your mood. And then it also so imagine you're doing this first thing in the morning, sets your RAS, your reticular activating system, to search for more things like that. Yes. So now you're seeing more positive things all day. So you are being happier and seeing more things to be grateful for, just because you started the practice first thing in the morning. And then also with this journal, you're also doing it right before you go to bed. So your brain is all night also on a positive note, which can help. And I would imagine it helps the neurotypical person to wake up also in a better mood.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so it's literally we do find what we're looking for. And what's really interesting, I just released an episode earlier this year with Peter Katz, and he too was saying that me too. Peter Katz is amazing. And he was saying that there's a lot of scientific research to back that the feeling that you have when your head hits the pillow is really correlated to how you wake up. And so he too has this little check, not necessarily like specifically gratitude, I guess, but he has this little check that he does before he goes to bed every single night, where he asks himself two questions. One is, have I done the best that I could today? And number two is, have I done my best to help other people be their best? And if he doesn't have like a double check, then he knows, he's like, okay, I gotta remember to like, ask myself this more often tomorrow, so that I can double check this before I go to bed, essentially, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah. And I love that for him. I feel like, with what I know about him, that is a regularly being the best he can be and helping people out the best he can. It's just almost second nature for him.
Yeah.
And he would just say that, like, for people who are a little bit harder on themselves, or perhaps do deal with depression, those questions might not be the questions for them. Like, everybody has to find, of course, what works for them, right? Like, what I'm telling and what I'm sharing is what works for me. Doesn't mean it's going to be the same, but I could see, the old me, if I asked those questions and I was like, no, now I would be like, oh, you were like so shit. You didn't do what you needed to do for people. And, oh, what's wrong with you? And it would start me in a downward spiral, actually, going to bed. So that would not be the time for me to ask that, So finding, I think it's just a good example of how we all need to try different things and find what works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. So we've got the meditation, we've got the gratitude journal. What other components do you got in this little morning routine before we kind of jump into more about your story?
So the other piece that used to be a must do every day was reading something uplifting, whether it was professional development, whether it was just a good news story, and not like, I don't open my phone and look at the news, because then you're sure not to find a good news story first. But, somewhere I was listening to an uplifting podcast or something uplifting. So either reading or listening, more often reading. But that piece has moved from that part of my day. And then the fourth piece that like now is the third piece, but also non-negotiable, is movement. Because movement really is medicine, and for anyone, for many reasons, physical and mental, and depending on what you're doing, can be spiritually helpful as well. But for people with depression, also studies have recently shown that movement is as effective as antidepressant medications.
Wow.
So obviously, again, like, I am not here saying, don't anyone take antidepressants, just
do some jumping jacks.
Right. This is not what I'm saying. And I am not a doctor. Like, follow medical advice. I myself, I'm currently on antidepressants because there are times when, like, period of years where it was fine. I was able to go off meds and my toolbox was enough. And then there are times where it's just too stressful and I need medication. So I'm not at all saying everyone go off their meds, but studies have literally shown exactly that. So it is absolutely medicine. And so that's, for me, the one thing. If I've tried everything, if I've tried meditating when I'm down, if I've tried affirmations when I'm down, I've tried all the other tools in my toolbox, I can move. And guaranteed within 5 minutes, I at least feel a tiny bit better. Usually a ton better, but at least a little better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing with that as well, and I've read some research on this as well, and correct me if you've got a different opinion or different facts on it, but the movement doesn't need to be like an hour, doesn't need to be like this long strenuous thing. It literally 10 minutes, 15 minutes of movement can help to wake your body up, get your blood flow moving, fire those neurons in your brain to wake you up and to help you feel better and allow that chemical release to have that sort of uplifting effect, right?
100%. Like, even Jim Quick, who's, the king of brain research and teaching about brain development and just how to optimize your brain, he says in his book, now I forgot what the name of the book is. Unlimited? Something like that. Anyways, it's an amazing book. I highly recommend people just put everything down that they're reading. Read this first, because it'll help you read every other book and learn every other piece of information you want to learn better. But he says in that book, 3 minutes, as little as 3 minutes of exercise helps.
Wow.
He does 3 minutes of jumping jacks while he's waiting for his coffee to brew in the morning. And that already wakes you up, creates more focus. And Mel Robbins taught me that, an incredible motivational speaker. Speaking of motivational speakers, she taught me that 20 minutes of heart rate raising cardio. And that doesn't mean you need to be doing aerobics. You can be walking at a pace that raises your heart rate. So 20 minutes of heart rate raising cardio can increase your focus for up to 2 hours.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's, you don't have to hit the gym for 2 hours or even an hour. You can get the benefits in smaller chunks, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, even just this quick conversation about your morning routine, I think that for anybody listening, like, and Blake Fly talks about this in Thank University, his concept of like floss one tooth, like literally just do the smallest thing that you can do to get started. So think about that the next time you're thinking about trying to exercise or meditate or do a gratitude journal, like floss one tooth, right? Like meditate for 2 minutes, do your gratitude journal one day a week or whatever for 5 minutes, right? Or do exercise for 5 minutes, like whatever it is, jumping jacks when your coffee's brewing, like do whatever you can to eliminate like as many barriers as you can so that it's as easy as possible for you to get started, so that you can start to build up the momentum.
Yes. And one other thing I want to say about that is, like, I had a friend who was following my program, and she started with the 5-minute journal app. And it's not mandatory that people start with that, but she did. And she would send me things like screenshots, and she's like, okay, I could only get one thing today. And she's down on herself because she could only get one thing that she actually felt grateful for. I was like, kudos to you. You got one thing. High five yourself that you did that. So celebrating your progress, as little as it might seem, instead of comparing yourself to either your end goal or, the other person that is better, anything like that. Like, start small, celebrate the small wins. That is so key. So
yeah.
key.
100%. And just to quickly tie that end up there, what you're talking about with you started with 2 minutes of meditating and eventually increased it and increased and increased it. After a month, you're at 7 minutes or 10 minutes, but it took 3 months for you, like 1 month for you to get that, okay, I have hope that this can really help. And then 3 months for you to really see, okay, this is becoming a non-negotiable thing that I have to do every single day. But each of those little tiny 2 minute meditations, each of those little tiny, sometimes that might seem insignificant, that 2 minute meditation on a Monday helped to push the momentum, help to build that momentum. So eventually you could get to that 7 minute meditation. So every little bit definitely counts. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing your morning routine. I think that's really helpful. And again, floss one tooth, just get started.
Yes.
So we've talked a little bit. I mean, we didn't get too deep into what a typical, an entire day looks like for high functioning depression. We got really stuck on the morning routine, which is fine because sometimes getting out of bed can be the absolute hardest thing. And the fact that you recognize that and you're like, I need to do this every day. And the fact that you're able to do it 95% of the time now, like is a huge win. And obviously you didn't start at 95% of the time. You had to struggle through that. And you said, try gratitude journals and affirmations and meditation and movement and all these different types of things before you got to this actual morning routine. So it takes that sort of experimentation. But what I'd like to move into now, and you mentioned this a little bit already, is you mentioned trying to be like that perfect student, trying to be that perfect, like 13 or 14-year-old. And I'd really like if you could take me back to that time in your life and tell me like what that was like, because you've described it to me as on the outside, because you have high functioning depression, from the outside, it seems like you're succeeding and doing well, but on the inside, like you're absolutely drowning. So I'd really like you to take me through that. And then we can sort of move through how that's progressed over the years.
Sure. So first, before I even start with that, I just want to have a disclaimer that high functioning depression is not a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis. I do have a medically diagnosed depressive disorder. I had read this article some years ago that talked about it, and I was like, that really sounds like me. And then more and more I read about it, and I'm like, okay, it's a real thing. Now there is some talk of how it can kind of, it's not necessarily the best term, because then it almost makes people think, oh, well, if I don't have high functioning depression, I'm worse off. Like, I'm not as good a person. I'm not, or the person who is high functioning, as if they're trying to say, I'm better than someone who is low functioning depression. Not the case for me at all. So I'm really on the search for what is the best term, but I have yet to find a term that encapsulates it better, because there are specific struggles to people who are like me, and this is what it is. So I was a really strong student academically. I had lots of friends in high school, such a good group. I was part of the student council. On the outside, I had all the things. And nuclear family, like the whole 9 yards. But on the inside, I felt like nobody understands me. Nobody's like me. I'm actually drowning. Life is so hard. Even though those things came easy to me, I didn't value it. Like, well, of course I'm a good student. Like, school is easy. It's not hard, and everything else, like just waking up. I didn't have any tools then. So just waking up and getting through the day, facing people I didn't know. Not that I was shy, like I was outgoing, but always thinking, what are they thinking of me? What's going on? I was so externally focused, not being able to be in touch with myself internally, other than that, like the voice was screaming at me, what's wrong with you? You're not normal. Like, nobody's ever going to understand you. You're the only one going through this. So I did feel like I was drowning on the inside. And then when I did reach out and say, I think there's something wrong with me, which of course now I recognize there was nothing wrong with me, but that was the language that I could use at 14 years old. And describing my struggles, because on the outside I had it all together and I was absolutely functioning very well at a very high level, higher than the average person. It was like, oh no, it's probably just, stress around exams. Oh no, it's probably just that it's winter in Canada and we don't get as a lot of sunlight. And so maybe you have like seasonal affective disorder, which is like, it's no big deal. Which first of all, it is a real thing. It's a very big deal for some people, but there was always some reason for why people thought I felt down in this moment. Like, it's fine. It'll pass. You're totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm not fine. But after enough people tell you you're fine, you actually start to think maybe I'm the one that's crazy, because everybody tells me I'm fine. Why do I not feel like I'm fine? I must be crazy, like, for real.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's got to be a big dilemma, like, going on inside your brain, like, especially as a adolescent, like 14 years old, and you're okay, I've reached out 5, 6, 7, 8 different times, and 5, 6, 7, 8 different people have told me that it's probably this or probably that. Like, that's got to be a very frustrating and time consuming, like, it probably takes a lot of energy to go back and forth.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, so after, you've gotten to this point where you've reached out a number of times and people have told you, this reason, that reason, or anything under the sun, and you're kind of having this internal battle, like, what happens next? Like, did you just start to, like, okay, accept things that, like, okay, I'm kind of a little crazy and I kind of just, this is what my life's going to be like? Like, what did that next step look like?
Absolutely. It was a bit of a resignation to the fact that, like, okay, well, clearly I don't think the way everybody else does. More affirmation that nobody will ever understand me, because they currently don't. So why will anybody else? And they were people who loved me, and they were smart people, and they were, people that you trust. And it wasn't like I was just telling random strangers who didn't know me. So then you just think they know better than you. So now it's making me also feel like less than and less worthy. And of course, just bringing you down further and further down the spiral. And it was like that for me probably, well, I would say until I got diagnosed at like 34 years old. And I was, again, all that while reaching all these milestones, getting hired to go to teach in Japan and going by myself and coming back and getting a job as a teacher and getting married and having 3 kids and all the things that people look to as the signs of success. I had them. And it wasn't hard for me to get them. Like, I could achieve no problem. I was a high achiever. So
yeah, that's
like, okay, nobody still gets me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I mean, through the podcast and the conversations that I have with people, this isn't like an uncommon thing where on the outside, somebody seems to be really successful. And I was like, oh, they're successful, so they must be happy. They have it all, so everything must be fine. But then behind the scenes, like, it's not necessarily like that. Like, when you were going through this, like, did you have any, like, imposter syndrome? Did you feel like you were living 2 different, like, lives, and, like, you were one person with people that you worked with, but, like, a completely different person, like, behind closed doors, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. That taught me that I couldn't be myself, that I had to be the perfect person all the time, because they didn't accept that I was struggling. So you may as well just put that real me aside, because nobody was listening to it anyways. So I may as well just be perfect. And then people accept me, and then people are happy to be around me, and then people are cheering for me and all those things. So I'm just going to continue to do my very best to be the perfect student, the perfect mom, the perfect wife, and hide the struggle, so that it was only if I was, like, alone or, with maybe very few trusted friends that I could actually, break down and cry or feel the feelings that I was feeling of frustration, of sadness, of depression.
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, how did that, I mean, obviously that's a very, like, it's a very fascinating thing that you got to this point where you're like, oh, I just can't be myself. Like, I have to pretend to be this other type of person. And I'm wondering, like, what did that do to your mental health, like on a day-to-day basis? What did that do in terms of like the self-talk that you had?
Self-talk was always negative, like really almost always. And again, that just creates this like dichotomy because everybody else is giving you all these compliments because they're seeing the perfect you. And you're just thinking like, no, that's not true. No. And you don't even think like any of the accolades, any of the accomplishments. Like,
you don't think they mean anything.
Like, that means exactly. That's nothing. Like, so it absolutely did that. And then it also came out as anger. So I could totally control myself at school because, you have to be the consummate professional. Well, I shouldn't even say that. There were times where I lost my cool at school. But usually, and certainly in front of the right people, I always knew to keep it together. And then at home, I was like a monster sometimes, truth be told. It's probably a big reason why my marriage broke down because I just, all of a sudden, it's like it had to come out somewhere. And it couldn't come out as sadness or crying because nobody's accepting that I'm depressed. So now it came out as anger instead.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You were told so many times that like, no, your sadness is not valid. You're successful, so you can't be sad. You're successful, so you can't be depressed. You have all of these things. Why don't you be grateful for this type of talk, where your body and your brain are eventually like, okay, obviously sadness is working, but there's this bubbling inside. It's got to come out, and it came out in anger and frustration. Do you mind taking me through some of those things? Like what would happen at home, like whether it was with like your family members or on your own or with close friends, like how would those blow ups happen?
So, I mean, very quickly and easily over things that the average person would not. And part of it is that I also grew up in a household where that was modeled behavior. So I had lots of modeling of what that could look like. But very much like if my kids didn't do something I asked them right when I asked them to, it was like a yelling match. Or if they didn't come for dinner. I mean, hello, how many of us, like if as adults, someone says like, dinner's ready, come right now. We say, oh, okay, I'm just finishing up a phone call. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Right. And everybody's like, okay, cool. See you. If my kids were like 5 more minutes, I was like, no, get your ass down here right now. Like, what do you think I do? I made this dinner. Like, it was ridiculous. I would just fly off the handle. Same thing with my husband. If I, came in late and he had work to do, whatever, then it was like, why aren't you helping with the kids? Or why? And it was a lot of like me feeling overwhelmed and me feeling like I was disrespected were the triggers for me to yell at anyone in my family, or not as much as friends, sometimes at friends, but mostly family.
And when, earlier in this episode, you mentioned, like gratitude and the fact that like we activate our it's the RAS, is that correct? RAS, yes. Where we kind of start seeing things more regularly, the more that we kind of focus on them, the more the attention that they give. So your triggers were being overwhelmed and being disrespected. Do you think, or do you know that you were looking for that on a regular basis?
Of course. I didn't realize it then.
Right.
But absolutely, I do now, because it's like, those are things that nobody else would feel, not nobody else, but many people would not feel disrespected by. They're just like, okay, they need 5 more minutes. It's no big deal, right? And for me, it was the biggest deal. And even now, like, I have those same triggers. I just deal with them in a very different way. But if I'm talking to people, they're like, I don't think that's disrespectful. Like, really, why do you think that's disrespectful? So those come from like traumas of my childhood, that those happen to be my triggers. But through A, the modeled behavior, and B, the not being able to express my true feelings of like, I'm sad, I feel lonely. I couldn't say like, I feel disrespected, and have those things be acknowledged and allowed. So all of a sudden I'm just this boiling pot.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from the ages of 14 to 34, that was kind of that phase in your life where or that period of time in your life where you were dealing with all of this, but there was no sort of, actual diagnosis or anything. So like, did you, other than reaching out to some friends or family members, I have two questions. Other than reaching out to, friends or family members and saying like, hey, I'm drowning on the inside, or, hey, I'm feeling really sad. Other than that, did you try and, was there any effort to try and get any sort of diagnosis or anything like that? And question number two is, how did you sort of manage? How did you deal with the blow-ups or the sort of trying to find the words. How did you deal with being like two different people, basically being like this perfect person for everybody on the outside, but being this sort of sad, depressed, angry person on the inside? Was there therapy? Was there anything that was sort of going on through that 20-year phase?
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. In high school, I believe it was when I was 16, I reached out to a school counselor, and she was really supportive. But again, there was nothing like from my family. It wasn't acknowledged that there was anything to be treated. Okay. So we never went to the doctor about it or anything like that. And then as an adult, I was having therapy like every year. I would have therapy for a period of time because it did help me to talk it out. I'm a verbal processor, so that really helped me. And it also helped to uncover some layers of trauma and some, things and ideas. And there were lots of different types of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy and different things. So definitely I was a firm believer and practicer or taking advantage of therapy for sure. Because although it was like denied that there was anything medically wrong with me, I knew that, well, I have some problems, so I guess I'll talk them out.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. And then you mentioned that at 34, you were diagnosed, and I know it wasn't high functioning depression, right? Specifically that you were diagnosed with. So what was it that, came out of that? What were you diagnosed with? And how did that change things? Did that immediately like, oh, okay, there's a path forward, or was it more frustrating than anything?
So at first, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, that is a major depressive disorder. It's a pretty big thing to diagnose, but I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist in a hospital, like an outpatient hospital visit, in 20 minutes, in a 20-minute conversation with myself and my husband. And like at the time, he was my husband. And it never really, I was like, really? I'm not so down that I don't get out of bed. And I'm not so high. All the things I'd heard of mania, which is like the high side of bipolar. I'm like, oh, no, I don't do that. No, I don't do that. Like, so how are you saying that I'm bipolar? And he called it something that no other medical professional since that I have encountered has ever heard of. I could never Google it and find it. He's like, oh, it's this new thing called brittle anger syndrome. And it's like it's something under the umbrella of bipolar. Okay. I totally accepted it right away. Like when he said, okay, it's brittle, I'm like, oh, well, I am angry all the time, so I guess that's the thing. And for me, it was such a relief because in my head, in my mind, I found out what was wrong with me. And so it's like, oh, okay, now we can deal with the problem, right?
Right.
Totally
Yeah.
At that time, that's what I thought. And so I was like, oh, we can now treat the problem and I can feel better. I don't like to feel angry all the time. That's why I was going to therapy, because I wanted to be a better person. I didn't want to feel angry and sad all the time. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be the answer. Like, this is the golden, cure. Like, okay, I'll take meds, I'll be better. But it didn't really work like that. And it turns out it was a misdiagnosis. And they're still not really sure exactly what depressive disorder that I have, but it doesn't look like it's bipolar disorder. And I read the books he recommended. It still was like, no, this doesn't really sound like me. Went to support groups and everybody that's shared, I was like, this is not my story. So as much as it never really seemed to fit, I believed, well, it's still a solution. It's going to provide the solution. So I was totally willing to accept it, but it wasn't till, I don't know. I mean, I was able to come off of meds by building up this incredible toolbox, probably about 7 years ago. And I felt way better because when I was on meds, for me, my experience was when we got to the right dosage, it seemed like the right dosage and the right meds, I was just flatlined all the time. So I didn't cry anymore. I also didn't feel super happy anymore. So I was like, well, the not feeling doesn't really feel good either. I think I'd rather cry and be able to be happy when something awesome happens to me or my friends or my loved ones. So so that's is why I built up this toolbox and then was able to come off meds under medical, direction and supervision. And then that's when I started to think, like, I guess that was kind of a bit of a fog, like that whole maybe, I don't know, but that's when I was like, okay, I don't think it was the right diagnosis. I do believe I have a depressive disorder. I see those symptoms, but like, I'd rather get re-diagnosed. And it was when I went through the re-diagnosis process with a psychologist who was able to take a longer period of time over, like, I don't know, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that, that it came out that if I do have bipolar disorder, it's very mild and very well under control, but likely another depressive disorder, and that I have ADHD as well. So that really was like, oh, and then I started to read, because I had the misconception of that too, like, oh, ADHD just means you can't focus and you're hyper. Right. I was like, I'm not hyper. That's not me. But my doctor had said, oh yeah, for years I thought you had ADHD. So anyways, learning those two things, it's been able, as I learn more and more about that, like, oh, so many ahas of, oh, that's why. I mean, that also makes sense why I wake up every single morning feeling like crap, because if my brain isn't producing enough dopamine, then I'm not waking up feeling excited on my own. So
yeah, literally. And what's really interesting was when the first time that we talked, you said that at 34, when you were diagnosed, I mean, at the time you were still a teacher, correct?
Oh, right? Yes.
And you had told me that you felt like you couldn't really tell anybody about the diagnosis. Like on the inside, you were like, oh, cool. There's something that has put me in this like category, has labeled me, which is a good thing because I haven't known what is quote unquote, air quotes, wrong with me. Right. So it felt like this sort of temporary relief, but then you're like, I can't tell anybody because like, who would want anybody with depression, like teaching their children, their kids. Right?
Exactly.
And it wasn't until your mom said something to you that really helped click. Do you want to take me through like what she said and how that like really helped?
Yes. It was such a wonderful gift she gave to me when she one day said, Marielena, it's no different than someone that has diabetes, and, they need to take insulin to help with their diabetes. And nobody goes around saying like, there's no stigma of having diabetes at all. She's like, for you, like that's a chemical imbalance in the amount of insulin that they're producing. Their body's not producing enough insulin on its own. For you, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. It's no different than that in as far as like, you don't need to be ashamed. It doesn't make you any different as a person. And I was like, oh, wow, such a good analogy for me. And that's when I was empowered to start to speak about it more.
Yeah. And so take me through a little bit of that, like in a little bit more detail, maybe like, why was that comparison? Why was that analogy so liberating for you? Why did it kind of shift the focus to empowering yourself to then start talking about it? Like, what was that shift that happened?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One is, previously there was a lot of analogies of like, well, if you had a broken leg, you'd go to the doctor and nobody, says like, oh, you're less of a person because you have a broken leg. And I'm like, yeah, but that's an injury that's going to heal. And you don't have to take meds for the rest of your life because you have a broken leg, right? But diabetes is an currently incurable disease that if you do need insulin or you do need medication, then generally you need it for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is no stigma around it. So it just made me realize, oh, this absolutely is no different. And so if that's the case, then, like I said, then the activist in me was triggered, which I've felt like an activist since I was 8 years old. And if people want to hear more about that story, they can read my book, or not my book, but the chapter in the book that I'm a co-author, because I talk a lot about it there. But it was like, oh, well, there's a bunch of stigma around this. And if that's the case, and I am this strong, successful person, which I absolutely was, then I need to be the one to bring this forward so that it can help other people and help to normalize depression.
Yeah, that's amazing that you made that shift and wanted to, again, that sort of activist, 8-year-old Emmy activist wanted to take this and be like, all right, I've learned something. And through my experience of not being diagnosed and being these two different people and being told so many different things, and now finally sort of making this little shift in my perspective, now I need to shout this from the rooftops. I need to tell people about this because I can't be the only one that is actually experiencing this. So how quickly after that did you start speaking about this, and how long have you been speaking about this, and what are some of the the biggest takeaways, or what are some of the happiest moments that you've had doing this type of work?
Publicly, I wouldn't have started speaking about it until I started my speaking career in 2020, just because I wasn't speaking publicly about anything. But certainly in schools, to teacher friends, or, my social circles, I started to just, organically spread the word and talk about it. And it was amazing then how many people were like, oh, yeah, I go through that too. I thought I was the only one. And the more you share, the more you realize yourself, wow, there's a lot of people going through this that are just as successful as me, that have just as much, it's not only people who aren't successful. Not everybody is debilitated by any disorder. So you can be this successful person and still have this. So of course it was affirming for me, and also for the people around me who even maybe didn't have a depressive diagnosis or a depressive disorder, but had gone through periods of their life where they had depression or anxiety or anything like that, where they felt depressed or anxious. It was really affirming for them and inspiring that someone they thought was so strong. It was surprising, I think, for a lot of people, but also inspiring for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something, and this is something that we have in common, is that you said to me a couple of weeks ago, when you started opening up, you almost opened the door for other people to share and to be vulnerable and to really show you a side that you don't know. And earlier you mentioned that, or just a few minutes ago, we mentioned that when you were diagnosed, it was oh, who would want, somebody with depression teaching their kids? When you started opening up to people and telling them about this, this thing that you were dealing with, did anybody have that reaction where they were like, oh, I can't believe this, you can't teach my kid? Was there any real negative reactions like that?
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously I don't know what people are thinking inside their head. And for a long time, I was still thinking that they would think that, or maybe they're thinking that, all of that, but no, nobody at all. Everybody was really positive. They either were like, how can we support, or surprised, like I said, but nobody ever said that. Ever.
Yeah. And I've had the same sort of experience when I talk about, attempting suicide in 2013, when I talk about being sexually assaulted in 2019, when I open up about those things, people don't turn around and say that I'm an idiot, or that they think that I'm any less of a person. They actually start to open up themselves. And we almost start to establish this like deeper relationship over this common ground, or even the fact, like, even if they can't relate to the couple of things that I'm talking about, they're still like, wow, like, thank you for trusting me to talk about something like that. And then we start having these sort of deeper, more meaningful conversations about everyday life. And you almost like take down this facade and show, hey, listen, it doesn't matter what you see on the outside. Like, I'm still this human being. I still go through these things, and we can still talk about them.
Absolutely. It creates this rapport because people, like you said, they feel like, oh, I can trust this person. They were willing to be vulnerable with me. And then they start to, also unpeel I call it the wallpaper that we all were layered with as we were growing up. So it's able to like peel back some of those layers and let their true light shine too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one more thing that I want to get into is that you mentioned that, you spent so many years trying to be the perfect mom, the perfect wife, the perfect teacher, et cetera, et cetera. When was it that you had this like, okay, never again moment? Because you said you felt like you couldn't be yourself for so many years. Like, you had to pretend and you had to be okay because people were not acknowledging the sadness or the depression at all. So like, when did you have this moment where you're like, never again, like, I'm not living this life anymore? When was that for you?
I think it was probably about maybe when I was 41, 42, which is about 6-7 years ago. It was just like 40 was a great milestone for me. That like, okay, now I'm 40. Like, it's happened. And some people think like, oh, now you're on the downhill, or you're on the no. I was like, okay, I'm good. There's no more point in pretending anymore. So yeah, by 41, probably maybe 42 at the latest. Like, I'm just going to be me. I'd had enough confirmation by then that being me was actually more successful than being the pretending. It certainly felt better. And so now people literally say like, I don't think you could actually not be authentic. Just be authentic. And they're like, actually, I don't think you could not. I wouldn't. I just choose not to.
That's such a compliment. That's amazing. I love that. And so take me through it, if you will, of like, what's that been like the last 6 or 7 years where you've been like, all right, never again. Like, I'm being 100% my full authentic self. Like, I'm sure that there's been some, still on the outside seeing the successful entrepreneur, getting some accolades, having a successful speaking career, but like, how has that changed your day-to-day life or your mental health over the last 6 to 7 years?
Well, it's super freeing for mental health, for sure. That's the most important thing. And that's why I refuse to go back to pretending, because it's the pretending, the wearing the mask long before we had to put on disposable masks that was killing me, like, for real. So stress levels way lower and way better for my mental health. So that is why it's not even an option for me. But it doesn't mean it was always easy either. I mean, when I speak my opinions, which are not always the most popular opinions, especially in areas where I'm acting as an activist, I'm still getting a lot of flack. And I was even to the point where, as a speaker, I had made it to the grand slam of this speaking competition, the finale for the year. And I had a speech already. And often for me, I'll have a speech, and then like a week or two before, this other amazing idea comes. I'll have 3-4 speeches by the time I get to my competition. So as usual, this idea comes to me in meditation, this download, this is what you have to speak about. And I actually called the co-founder of the competition, because it was a very controversial subject at the time. And I said, listen, this is what I feel like I need to talk about. Like, are you okay with that? Because it is your competition. And I don't want to totally throw it out the window for you. And she's like, no, yep, that's what you should talk about. Okay. And I got up on stage, and never, ever in my life, knowing that there would be more haters than I've ever experienced, that this would be getting more eyes on me than at that time I had ever had. And I just stood so proudly in my truth and spoke. I mean, some of my family wasn't speaking to me and hadn't been speaking to me for 6 months over this issue. And the issue actually wasn't even the point of the speech, but it was the story that I told about how I lost my family, how I lost friends because of the stance I took. And it was just like, this is me. And then again, of course, there were haters, absolutely. But there were also so many more people that were like, wow, I didn't know that that's how you felt. I didn't know that that was your position. I'm so honored that you got up on the stage and you like stood up for us and you were willing to say that because for sure I wasn't winning the competition. I mean, I lost half the judges on like what the story was about. I knew that. I was throwing away a win. I could have had my other speech whatever, but this was more important to me. And so when I just come from that place of authenticity and being who I really am, that always feels better than any of the negative side effects that.
Wow. That's a really, really interesting story. And I mean, to have that confidence and that self-belief to be like, no, I need to be true to myself in this moment. Like doing this one, sure, I could win, or have like a much better chance at winning. But this other one, like this is going to feel so much better afterwards. Like the first speech or the first topic, like I might win, but I might just spend so much time wishing that I had done the second speech, the second one.
Exactly.
And having that first of all, that awareness and the confidence to be like, nope, I got to do me. Like that speaks so many volumes to just how far you've come and the progress that you've made. And how the last question I'll ask before we get into sort of the closing remarks here is, what has that done for your relationships? Because obviously speaking on a topic that can be controversial, like you said, that there's going to be haters, but on the flip side, there's also going to be people that are going to be like, whoa, like I feel more connected to this woman because she's spoken so strongly about this. So what has that done for personal and professional relationships?
It really overall did strengthen them. Some of my family members came around some months after that. People who were in the audience that night who were offended by my story or bothered or whatever feelings they were feeling, by my like continuing on professional conversations with them, they eventually were like, oh yeah, like for example, one girl who was a fellow competitor said, yeah, my family had this experience and said they were really offended by your speech. And I was like, okay, like, thanks for letting me know. And to the point where actually my story in the chapter in my book, they also asked me to change because it had to do with some parts with the same story. And, oh, you'll just turn away viewers and whatever. I'm like, listen, if the other authors are really bothered by it, hey, I don't want to hurt the sales because it's a collaborative book, no problem. But this is my truth. And so the one person said that, well, my friends were, or my friends and family. And I said, okay. But through having continued conversations and not just being like, oh, you were offended. Well, too bad for you. Like I didn't cut people off because it opens up the door for conversations. And eventually she's like, wow, you're such an amazing person. I can learn so much from you. And I actually really admire that you stand up for what you believe. Doesn't mean we have to agree on anything, or everything. For sure. There's place. I try to come to people to continue conversations so that hopefully we can all come to an understanding that we can disagree with each other, even radically, politically, or whatever it is, and still live in a very peaceful and cohesive way.
Yeah. And I love that message. We don't always have to agree, but we can do it in a respectful manner where we can have conversation and dialogue where there is not agreement. Like that is an okay thing, to do. And I love that story that you've told. Emmy, thank you so much. You've shared so many details of your story, and I have a few of my own takeaways, and I'm sure that people that are listening are going to feel inspired, and they're going to feel a little bit of admiration for you as well, because you are living your truth, and that is amazing. And I love to hear that, and I love talking to people that are just like, listen, I got to do me. Like, I got to live my authentic self, my authentic life, because that's the best thing that I know how to do. And some people are going to love it and some people aren't. And I'm okay with that, because like the people that are meant to be in my life will be the people that are going to be, standing by my side or standing behind me, pushing me through anything that I face. So absolutely love that that's where you're at. I have two quick questions for you. One is for anybody that is experiencing, whether it's a depressive phase or diagnosed depression, what would be sort of your one piece of advice or your one piece of guidance to that person to kind of push through, or to live somewhat of a, I don't want to say normal, but somewhat of a normal life?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you haven't gone to your doctor about it, go. And if your doctor pushes it off as like it's less than, listen to your body and get a second opinion and a third opinion, whatever it takes, because you do know yourself best. Now, once you've dealt with that and, whatever the treatment is, really, really, I do think, especially for people who deal with depression or depressive episodes, move your body every single day. When you feel the worst and you think you just want to curl up and stay in your bed, or you just want to cry all day, or you want to rage, whatever it is that you're feeling, go for a walk. Like, just get out in nature if you can. Go for a walk, because the movement will help you. And then if you're in nature, oh my goodness, the chemicals of the trees, they literally feed our body things that we are missing. And, the trees, going by water, like anything like that, being in nature, breathing in the fresh air, like then we just breathe more too, which is, of course, oxygenating our brain and our body is super helpful. There's so many reasons why simply taking a walk in nature. And if you hate walking, like, go dancing. I don't know. I danced out in my front lawn for the one day, and I was like, yep, it's all good. Jump in puddles if that's what's fun for you. Find a movement that is fun and just do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside if you can.
Outside if you can. Absolutely love that. And then my second question is, what is your advice or your guidance for anybody that is either stuck in their comfort zone or just really wants to step into their authentic life, or wants more out of life but doesn't necessarily know what the next step is? What would be your piece of advice or guidance?
Well, I would say, if you don't know what the next step is, tune into yourself, because your conscious mind may not know what the next step is, but your inner self, whether you want to call it your higher self, your intuition, your unconscious mind, any of those terms, they're all so connected to what you really, really, actually, it all, but that is where the knowing can come from. So for some people, it'll be meditating. For some people, it'll be journaling. For some people, it'll be going for a walk in nature. There's so many ways to tune into yourself, but stillness is helpful for sure, because we can then shut out all the outside voices, stimuli, etc., and you will get an answer. And whatever that answer is, take action. Even if, actually, I'm going to say, especially if it seems like the wildest idea, like, take the leap. It always feels better when you take the leap. It's the looking at the precipice, the scary thing, that is the scariest. Once you jump, it always feels better. I shouldn't use extremes, like to say always, but
the majority of the time.
Always, for sure. Yes, for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emmy. I really appreciate your words of wisdom there at the end. And again, really appreciate you being courageous and vulnerable and sharing your entire story. I know it's going to help at least one person out there, and that's all that matters. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time and effort to be on the Comfort via Discomfort podcast.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you agreeing to have me on, although we don't know each other super well, and through our conversation, realizing it was a good fit. And I'm just so grateful to have been on. Thank you.
Yes, it didn't take long to realize that you were a good fit for this. So, and I'm going to put I'll get your links afterwards, but I'll put all of your links in the description so people can find your website, can find you online, can find your book, can find the 5-minute journal that you were talking about. You shared so many resources and I really appreciate that. And, we're obviously going to stay in touch through Thank University for the rest of the year. So I'm really excited for our relationship to grow even further. Thank you so much, Emmy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it and that it inspired you on your journey to living your best life. Now make sure to check out the show notes below for a rundown of today's show with all the important links, such as where to find the guest online and important resources that they may have mentioned. Also make sure to share this episode with a friend or family member and subscribe so you get the notifications when new episodes are released. I absolutely love hearing feedback from you guys, so I encourage you to share a review on the platform you're listening on and let me know what your biggest takeaway was from today's episode. Now it's time to go out and build the life of your dreams one step at a time. And remember, the only way to be comfortable is to be uncomfortable first.